which some viewers may find distressing.
Tonight's reconstructions tell the true stories of those whose lives have been changed by landmines. We've sometimes used actors, but everything you see and hear is based on the accounts of the people involved.
Many of the victims are children, and they usually kill children on the spot.
The evil that men do lives after them.
For the mine is a stealthy killer.
Landmines will go on killing. It is up to us to put a stop to the killing fields.
Tonight on 999, a childhood cruelly shattered in Bosnia. The war is over, but the casualties continue. And why the man who inspired Princess Diana considers himself lucky to be alive.
It looks so harmless, doesn't it? Just a tiny piece of plastic. But it's actually a landmine that's been specifically designed to kill and maim people. It costs only a few pounds to make, but by the time it's been hidden on the ground, it can cost up to £2,000 to detect and defuse. But the real cost, of course, is in human life. A child who sees it and picks it up thinking it's a toy will be killed. An adult who just steps on it will have both his legs blown off, at best. The world is littered with at least 100 million landmines. They stay active long after wars are over, creating new killing fields for innocent civilians. More than a third of all the mines that have been laid are here in Africa, and Angola in particular has more than its share of victims. Around 200 people a month have been killed or injured here since I filed this report 11 years ago. In the bush south of Kangamba, the rainy season respite is over. The superpower stakes are rising here, so are the civilian casualties. Thousands of children like Terian Mena have already been maimed and killed in the mine-strewn plains of central Angola. There are estimated to be 30,000 Angolans who have lost their legs in this war, the highest number of amputees in the world. The number of amputees and fatalities has since risen dramatically, and there are more than 4 million displaced people in Angola who can't return home because of the landmines. Despite all this, it's taken 10 years for the humanitarian issues over landmines to make the headlines. In 1997, a group campaigning to ban landmines won the Nobel Peace Prize, and 125 nations signed a Treaty of Limitations, the first step on the road to a complete ban. But it was Princess Diana's involvement in the issues that most clearly focused the world's attention. Her visit to Angola and her reflections on what she saw there seem to have had much more impact than anything I sent back a decade earlier.
When you look at the mangled bodies of some of the children caught by these mines, you marvel at their survival. Loss of an arm or leg is an overwhelming handicap which lasts for life. That is something to which the world should urgently turn its conscience. How can countries which manufacture and trade in these weapons square their conscience with such human devastation? I spent a morning with the Halo Trust, which is training Angolans to get these mines out of the earth. Much ingenuity has gone into the making of some of these mines. Many are designed to trap an unwary deminer. That is what keeps their lives perpetually at risk.
Firing.
Because clearing mines costs so much and takes so much time, casualties continue to mount. Many are refugees returning eagerly to their homes, where mines now lie hidden in landscape they once knew to be safe. Our first reconstruction is a typical story. It happened in June 1996 in the suburbs of Sarajevo, but as this short Red Cross film shows, it's an all too familiar pattern of personal tragedy that's repeated somewhere in the world 3 times every hour.
Anti-personnel mines can be seen as the soldiers hidden in the soil who have not heeded to a call for a ceasefire. The war raged on in Bosnia-Herzegovina between 1992 and 1995, and during this period mines were laid in the front lines and also as a protection to the soldiers and the military installations. Each month between 30 to 50 individuals are either killed or hideously maimed. There are up to 3 million mines scattered throughout Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the area around Sarajevo is considered to be the most densely mined area in the world.
The Dobrinja district on the edge of Sarajevo saw some of the worst fighting. It was here that a 2-room apartment became home to Tihomir Ostojic and his 14-year-old son Tihomir, played here by an actor.
When I came to live here during the war, we were near the front line, which was heavily mined. We had to be careful of snipers and shells. It was very frightening just going outside. My best friend was killed by a sniper. By June '96, the war had been over for several months, and we could play up in the hills again. If the weather was good, my friends and I would go to the river. That morning, loads of us went. We were a very close group. We went to the same school and we often hung around together. We played football, went to the cinema, and some of us did karate. We had a really great time. It was hot and we stayed there for about 3 hours. We agreed to meet up later and go picking cherries in an old orchard. But first I would have to get my dad's permission to go.
Ah, Tihomir, where have you been?
Out swimming with my friends.
Have fun?
Yes, thanks. I'd been to the cherry orchard once before, but my dad was cross when he found out, so I wasn't sure he'd let me go again.
You've been over this before, and you know what the answer is going to be, and the answer is no.
But nobody's ever been blown.
Tihomir, it is full of landmines.
I was very firm with him.
The answer is no.
I'd never been to the orchard myself, but I knew it was close to the former front line, so there was a strong possibility it was mine. I told him, I can't let you go there, Tihomir. There are minefields all around that area.
It would be embarrassing to be the only one left out, so I thought I'd have one last try to change his mind.
Dad, please, you know I'll be careful.
Tihomir, no. No.
I don't want to be the only kid that doesn't go.
He kept on and on asking to go. I kept saying no. Then, like most parents, I gave in.
Oh, boy. Can you be careful?
Yes.
Can you promise me that?
Yeah.
We'll have some fun with your friends, huh? Okay. Be careful.
Thanks, Dad.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
After he'd gone, I felt uneasy. I had this dreadful feeling that I shouldn't have given in. Something just didn't feel right.
When we got there, some boys warned us there were mines at the top of the orchard, but we weren't bothered because we were planning to stay lower down. There were no signs to say there were mines. There was nothing anywhere to warn us.
Eventually, my worries got the better of me. I just had to make sure Tihomir wasn't in danger.
I was more interested in climbing trees than picking cherries, but the cherries were good and I climbed up to get the best ones.
No.
From the top of one tree, I could see the cherries were riper on another tree, where my friend Mickey was, so I thought I'd climb down and go and join him.
But I've been there before, nothing's ever happened to me.
I said no. You know why? Let's leave it at that.
Nobody's ever been blown up.
Tihomir, you're trying my patience, young man. The answer is no.
I don't want to be the only kid that doesn't go.
After the first explosion, I know that I covered my face with my hands. I don't remember anything at all about the second explosion.
Tihomir!
Minos!
What?
I immediately knew deep inside that Tihomir was hurt. I ran up the hill and found him lying there under a cherry tree. It's a scene that will haunt me forever. I found my son, all torn apart and covered in blood. I'll always remember his eyes. They seemed so big, so beautiful, so green, but they were spattered with blood. He said, "Daddy, I'm going to be an invalid. Let me die." I said, "You won't die. I'm not going to let you die."
It's gonna be okay. Look after me. Come. We're going. It's gonna be okay.
I wasn't sure how to pick him up. His bones looked so shattered. His little hand looked like a wilted rose. I don't know whether I screamed. I just don't know how I behaved. But Tihomir's friends had managed to get help, and a man drove us to the hospital.
When they got Tihomir to hospital, they found that the first mine had blasted away 2 of his toes before throwing him onto a second mine. That would have killed him if he hadn't protected his head with his hands as he fell. But he suffered dreadful injuries. Doctors had to amputate both his arms below the elbow and spent a month controlling infection. 2 years later, the hospital visits continue. It's been 2 years of suffering for Tihomir, trying bravely to come to terms with the loss of his hands. And 2 years of sorrow for his father, wishing he could turn the clock back to that fateful decision.
Lots of people have told me how lucky I am to be alive after stepping on not just one, but 2 landmines. I know I'm really lucky not to have died.
I try my best to be a good father, but it hasn't been easy on my own. I've aged 10 years since the accident. Tihomir could have been a great athlete. He loved sport and he loved his karate training. He's still a wonderful kid. I think I'm more aware of what he's lost than he is.
About 7 months after the accident, I was given 4 arms, but they don't work properly, and now they're too small, so I need new ones. I've had no arms for a long time now.
I hope that Tihomir will complete his education, that he'll get a job and earn his own money. I hope that his lack of hands won't prove a great disadvantage. I hope that girls won't avoid him. I encourage him to live life to the full as much as he can. I tell him he's inferior to nobody.
I would like to finish school. It would really help to have a computer so I could write. I hope I can get a job and support myself. I want to be independent. One day I'd like to get married. And I'd really like to be a good father.
In Bosnia, the British Army is working hard to make children like Tihomir more aware of the dangers of mines. A special unit of the Royal Engineers visits schools in the most heavily mined areas. At this primary school in Prusak, the playground is surrounded on 3 sides by minefields. But because the problem is so widespread, the school is not yet a priority for the clearance teams. Sergeant Bill Bowen's teaching method is simple and to the point.
Who has seen the mines before? All these mines are trip mines. Sometimes you can see them, sometimes you can't. They remain a threat for many years to come. You see these are too close to them.
I ako igdje vidite ove znakove, to znači da ste veoma blizu minskog polja.
You understand?
Jeste razumjeli to?
Yes. The landmine is an invisible killer. You can walk around and everything looks safe. But this hidden danger casts a constant shadow over everybody around, and in particular, those whose job it is to clear the mines. Like the Halo Trust, the Mines Advisory Group is a British organisation doing this vital work in Angola.
Ok, pode arbitrar para a troca do pessoal, câmbio.
Each team has a 1 metre strip to clear. We could expect to be here for a year clearing this, looking for what we know to be only 20 mines in there. The problem is we don't know where in this area the 20 mines are, so we have to search the whole area. There have been no patterns to the minefields here. They've been laid totally randomly by both former guerrillas, if you like, and the government forces. They've laid them without marking them, without recording them in any way. It's very, very painstaking. Every fragment of metal that's in what was a battlefield has to be identified and pulled out.
When a mine's discovered, it can be a tense time, despite all the training and experience. They can often deactivate simple mines. Here, under the watchful eye of a supervisor, a deminer carefully removes the detonator. Where there may be booby traps, or where one mine has been planted on top of another, the safest thing is to blow them up. The full blast of an anti-tank mine will rip through any amount of body armour, and from time to time accidents do happen. These men are trained to minimise the risks, but it's a country where everyday life is a risky business.
The population are effectively paralysed. The roads are all mined, or most of them are mined. You have a situation here where you clear a piece of land and immediately you're seeing people moving behind you, building on it, digging it up. And there really is no more rewarding sight than seeing somebody who obviously needed that land so badly that they can barely wait for you to get off it before they take it over.
With millions of villagers waiting for their land to be cleared, there's an urgent need for community education to reduce the relentless toll of deaths and injuries. These children have never been to school, but thanks to the Mines Advisory Group Action Team, they're learning about the dangers of mines. Through songs, games and graphic illustrations, the message is clear and simple. Don't stray from areas you know to be safe, and stay well away from anything that looks like a mine.
Coisa que não conheces. Uma mina ou granada. Vamos bater palma, palma, palma.
10,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., Ken Rutherford runs a support network for injured landmine survivors. His interest began after he became a landmine victim himself.
Called Neil Smith.
Ken Rutherford's injuries stemmed from an incident in Somalia in 1993, which would have killed him, but for a remarkable rescue that we've reconstructed in detail using an actor to play Ken. People from 7 different nationalities came together to help him, and they had to improvise to save his life. And the story also shows how landmine injuries can have different consequences for Westerners than for others. Ken was an aid worker who'd volunteered to go to Somalia at the end of a long and bloody civil war that I'd reported on a year earlier. This is no man's land, at the centre of a battle that's cost 30,000 casualties and wrecked an entire city. With the port in the front line, the Red Cross is trying to bring food in by landing craft. Thousands of children will die before it's distributed. If only Somalis could eat guns, they'd be all right. That's the only thing that they have plenty of.
In Somalia, in 1993, the famine was basically over with. The scenes that we saw on TV of starving populations was no more. And what we're trying to do was economically stabilize the area.
What happened with that Somali guy?
What Somali guy?
Ken was working for the International Rescue Committee. He organized small loans, and he funded mostly projects that they could continue on their own in order to promote self-reliance.
You know the guy that threw the hand grenade in your building? Did you make a decision about that?
Tihomir was a nurse working for the Africa Medical and Research Foundation, helping to rebuild a hospital that was bombed out and looted. And it was very nice to have a company of another American there.
I'm gonna hire him.
What? You're gonna hire him?
Yeah, I'm gonna hire him.
Why? I mean, that's like supporting terrorism.
We were chums. I sort of had a little crush on him, but it was more one of great admiration. He's a very strong fellow and very dedicated.
Well, if I don't hire him, they're gonna blow my legs off, and then you'll have to care for me. So I'm doing it for you.
You're crazy. You know, you're really crazy.
I would have forgotten that. Normally, just brushed it off as one of his jokes. But it was quite eerie, considering what happened the following day.
Dwali? You awake, Dwali?
Dwali was a big part of my insight into Somali culture.
Can I come in? I got something to show you.
I was Ken's liaison officer. We know each other 5 months.
Yeah, there's an article here about landmines. Here.
He knew that I was interested in landmine because many Somalis, many friends of mine, Somali people, killed by landmine.
It says there's between 1 million and 1.5 million here in Somalia. Look, there's 85 million worldwide.
Neither of us knew that the landmine will become an important part of our life.
That Thursday was around 9:30 when we decided to set off for the lime producing projects.
Dwali, come on. Let's do it, huh?
We drove on a road to Wajid, which is parallel to the Ethiopian border, a well-traveled road, and I felt very safe.
This road is the pits.
That day we were very happy because all of us were interested in the job we were doing.
The plan for the morning was to review the 2 or 3 loan applicants' projects and get back to the bank. We conduct our lives by diaries and schedules, and little do we realize that those plans are very flimsy. In the car was our local bank manager, the board of directors for the bank, and 3 recently returned refugees. I was sitting in the middle front seat, the driver was to my left, Dwali was to my right, and my legs were angled to the right because the gear shifts were in the middle. We were going for about a half an hour, and I think there was a donkey cart off to the side of the road.
We could see a man pushing a wheelbarrow in front of us, and then that's the last thing I remember. I looked down to my left, and then I have seen my leg, right leg, hanging down.
I wondered to myself, whether the foot on the floorboard was his or mine. And it ended up being mine. My left foot looked like a peeled back sardine can. And my right foot was hanging down towards my knee. It was completely hanging off. And this foot drug out with me. What bugged me wasn't the pain, but that it looked so odd. I kept on trying to put my foot back on. I had suddenly become something rare for an American. I had become a landmine victim. The radio that was attached to my belt clip fell out with me.
Kilo Romeo to base. Kilo Romeo to base.
I realized that the radio on my belt was our lifeline.
At least 2 people badly injured and bleeding. We need help. I'm blood group O positive. Please send help.
It was only after I had called for help that I realized I could be dying. A colleague tied tourniquets on my legs, and we waited for help. I thought every breath could have been my last one.
Tamara! Tamara! It's been a terrible accident. What's happened? Ken Rutherford's hit a landmine. Oh my God.
Just the word landmine sends a blood-curdling kind of effect through me. I grabbed rudimentary basic supplies and took off with the driver to the site.
They're gonna blow my legs off, and then you'll have to care for me. So I'm doing it for you.
It seemed like a lifetime for help to arrive. I thought of my girlfriend back in Colorado. We just got engaged 2 months before. I was looking forward to getting married to her. It was only when I thought of her that I really wanted to live again. I think those moments have been some of the most peaceful moments of my life.
Why? I mean, that's like supporting terrorism.
They're gonna blow my legs off, and then you'll have to care for me.
You know, you're really crazy.
There's between 1 million and 1.5 million here in Somalia.
I was thinking how I will be in the rest of my life. Who will help my children? I was sure that I will lose my leg, and that will affect to get a job, because the work always goes to the fit people.
As Tamara approached the accident, she couldn't see Ken, who was hidden behind the damaged vehicle.
There was a bystander who was a Somali lime worker who had some severe injuries. He had a compound fracture of his right femur, and his right hand had been severed from the right arm at the wrist and was just kind of sitting on his chest. He was conscious and he was breathing. He was in pain, but the bleeding was not severe at that point. Diwali was the second person I came across. He had a compound fracture of his right ankle, meaning the bone was sticking out of the flesh. But he was breathing, he was alert, he wasn't bleeding severely.
Where's Ken?
Over there, behind the car.
Ken was in the worst state. He looked at me, he was quite pale and a great deal of shock, bleeding profusely. So I immediately wrapped his leg up with pressure dressings, lots of pressure dressings. He was bleeding to death. I put in lines in each big vein in his arm, lots of normal saline, tourniquet, an additional tourniquet.
It's gonna be all right.
In order to transport Ken safely, we needed to put him into a pickup truck because he needed to lie flat with his leg elevated to decrease bleeding, and also because he was in shock. We need as much blood to the brain as possible. You don't want to put someone in a vehicle sitting because it just causes them to bleed more, and he was bleeding enough. Most mine victims die out in the middle of nowhere with no facilities close to them, and also most of them are alone. 50% die before ever reaching a medical facility.
Tamara went back to help Douale and the bystander Salat before going with them to Luke Hospital, where all three were given painkillers and fresh dressings for their wounds.
Even though surgery could not have been performed at Luke Hospital because of a lack of equipment and medication, there were personnel there to at least render competent first aid. And plans were already in the making to get the medevaced out, and Ken clearly needed to go first as he was the worst off.
A search of the radio frequencies found a flying doctor's plane 100 miles to the south. The pilot, Joe Moran, heard the call for help and agreed to divert to Luke.
My problem is this is a twin-engine Cessna and I'm fully loaded.
It was decided eventually that I would go with Ken because I had a greater degree of trauma training than the other personnel. I'd been a flight nurse as well before.
Wait just here until the vehicle arrives. It should be here just a minute, all right? Okay, you're gonna be all right.
There wasn't time enough to collect an overnight bag or sort through clothing or anything. I just grabbed the passport and left. And as I was leaving, someone thrust a $100 bill in my hands.
At 11:15, Joe Moran reached the dirt strip at Luke.
My first impression was that somebody had stepped on a landmine. I vaguely remember my first reaction to that was silly twit, walk on a landmine. You know, it blows holes in your shoes and they leak like hell afterwards. You know, the seriousness of the thing didn't catch up with me immediately.
Tomorrow I can't get to Nairobi on what we've got. We're going to have to go to Mandera for some fuel first.
Okay, can you radio ahead? I need some IV fluids, normal saline. I need blood, at least 4 units of blood. I need a doctor if you've got one and some oxygen.
Oxygen and a doctor if they've got.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll go.
And pain medicine, some morphine.
Morphine. Okay, I can radio ahead for all of that. Do you want to get him on?
Yeah, I'll take care of it. All right. The stretcher comes apart at the bottom. Down here.
I believe we need O positive blood. Careful of his legs.
Watch his legs.
Careful. And a doctor, if you've got a doctor, can you please come to the airstrip as soon as possible, over?
Less than 2 hours after the accident, the Cessna took off on the 15-minute flight to Mandera, across the border in northern Kenya, where a Belgian doctor was already responding to the alert.
At the time, I was working with Médecins Sans Frontières in a Somali refugee camp. The camp had some 50,000 Somali refugees who fled the civil war in Somalia. I was out in the camp when I heard over the radio handset that they needed blood for a landmine victim. 2 donors were already present. So I took from each 1 pint of blood. I took some blood samples which I sent to the camp laboratory to have them tested for hepatitis B and HIV. And then I would get the results later on. I went to the MSF storeroom where I fetched some IV fluids to keep up the circulation, some synthetic drug to ease the pain. I had some bits and pieces, a tourniquet, and I had oxygen also.
Just in that short flight between Luke, Somalia and Mandera, he was going downhill very fast. I had gone through all the IV fluids I'd brought, and he needed blood instead of just IV fluids because he was pumping it out as fast as I was putting it in. I was really afraid that I was going to lose him there. It's very hard to be alone and be responsible for one's friend's life.
When we landed at Mandera, everything worked quite well. The fuel was waiting, the fuel pump worked. Sometimes it doesn't. So the fueling was probably done in record time.
Excuse me, please. Let me pass through. I'm a doctor. Here you go. This one.
All right, thank you.
I went in the airplane, checking his condition, and I saw he was in a bad shape. Tomorrow already was a bit tired.
Is there any way that you could go with me or send another
I
volunteer?
was the only medical doctor at the spot, so then I decided to go along with her to Nairobi.
They were airborne just after midday, and Joe radioed his Nairobi base for a backup plane to collect Duale and Salat.
Distance to Nairobi would have been about 450 miles. A flight time of 2.5 hours.
We gave Ken the synthetic drug, the painkiller.
Ken, I'm just going to put something in your nose.
We gave him oxygen, and then we monitored his blood pressure, which remained critically low.
There's too much noise.
I've just got news that the tests on the blood are HIV negative.
Good. Maybe we should take it out of the cold box and warm it up a bit.
We were very happy because Ken was as white as a sheet and clearly needed blood rather than more IV fluid. So we warmed those up as quickly as we could and infused them rapidly.
Stop.
We squeezed the 2 pints with our hands in order that they would go faster into Ken.
Okay.
His blood pressure remained very low, so I wondered if he wasn't still bleeding from his 2 legs.
Oh my God, there's blood all over the place.
I checked and I saw the blood dripping from his feet.
Joris and I were both extremely worried about Ken. He was in terrible shock and extremely close to death. It was a minute-by-minute fear that we were going to lose him. It was very frightening.
I chose, first of all, to fly at about 12,500 feet to get a smooth, comfortable ride for Ken to Nairobi.
Can we fly lower so that he gets more oxygen? Can we fly lower?
Okay. Joe!
I was more concerned about blood pressure than his oxygenation, because the higher you go, the lower the blood pressure drops.
I was almost cutting my grass. It was cowboy flying, but I was used to it, and I think quite good at it.
The unfortunate part of that is the lower you go, you have more turbulence and you go slower. Then I said, okay, just for the sake of time, let's go up again a little bit. So it was constantly adjusting.
4 hours after the explosion, and Ken was deteriorating fast.
He's very, very pale.
His pressure's dropping again as well.
I discussed with Tamara the possibility of me giving him a pint of blood.
Joris was O positive as well as Ken, and I'm O negative, which is a universal donor.
So here you go.
We each took a pint of blood from one another. It's quite simple. You have a blood bag and a needle and a tube.
We didn't have to ponder it too much. It was a very quick decision. We just said, he needs more blood, all right, we don't have any. We have it in our veins, let's do it. I'm sure he would have died without it.
Could you use a drink?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I figured that, well, probably they needed some replacement of fluid, and so I handed them Cokes that I had with me. They say it takes the rust off bolts, but I think that they were glad of it. They were a good team. They were the pick of the bunch. And I figured that if they could just keep Ken going until we arrived in Nairobi, that he would in fact be okay.
In the later stages of the flight, Ken started to gain consciousness a bit.
Can you hear me? Can you open your eyes?
Will Kim still want to marry me?
Of course she will. Of course she will.
Then, on the final approach to Nairobi, one more anxious moment.
He lost consciousness again, so there was only one thing left to do, and that was to yell at him to increase the body's own adrenaline level, which increases your blood pressure.
Stay alive. Come on, stay alive. Open up your eyes.
It's not a technique that I've used ever before, but it worked.
For the first time since his accident 5 hours earlier, Ken was finally close to a hospital equipped to deal with the seriousness of his injuries.
I was very glad when we arrived in Nairobi because we had already used all our IV fluids. We had nothing left to give him. There was an ambulance ready with some paramedics. So we put Ken in the ambulance, and Tamara and I accompanied him to Nairobi hospital. When I handed him over in the emergency room to some colleagues with good equipment, it was like the pressure that was on me for 3 hours drained, and I was very, very glad handing him over alive.
Once we'd gotten Ken sort of settled into the ICU and into the hands of the intensivist there, I went out into the ICU waiting room and promptly sort of fell apart for a few minutes. And after regaining some composure, noticed that Joris was sitting there very quietly.
We did a good job, yeah?
I just said, yeah, yes, we did a very good job.
I have to go. Hope you'll be fine. You take care. I knew Tamara only for a couple of hours, but living this very difficult experience together brought us together. I was exhausted, particularly emotionally. It's not every day you find yourself in a bumpy airplane, giving your blood in order to save someone's life. It was like all the tension and emotion got released.
Tamara called Ken's parents in Colorado to break the news and discuss the medical options before signing consent for a below-knee amputation of Ken's right leg. She refused consent to amputate his left leg in the hope that it could be rescued by surgeons in America. That was ultimately to prove a vain hope. While Ken lay in the operating theatre, Duale and Salat were also admitted to Nairobi Hospital. Duale refused an amputation because he knew it would end his career. His employers agreed to pay for lengthy reconstructive surgery, and his leg was eventually saved. With nobody to pay for a prosthetic hand, Salat would no longer be able to push a wheelbarrow or a plough. Today, he remains dependent on his family.
This accident could have happened to anybody, and this is a strange thing to say, but I'm very happy that it happened to me. I almost lost my life and I got it back. And life is much greater and sweeter the second time around. In the next 9 months, I was in 3 hospitals, undergoing 6 operations. I was in a wheelchair for many parts of that time, on crutches, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and basically recovering. And then in September, Kim and I got married. I was just about well enough to walk normally down the aisle, and I was good enough that day to stand more than I ever had before, greeting and meeting the guests. It was the greatest day of my life.
Do you want this?
How blessed I was to have so many people help me. I want them to know that I and my family and my sons will always, always be grateful. What happened to me that day has allowed me to better understand what landmine victims go through. And hopefully I can put this experience to help others.
Ken's practical response was to set up Landmine Survivors Network. From a small office in Washington, he campaigns widely to win support for landmine victims. Tihomir Ostojic, whose story we saw earlier, is one of thousands of cases on his files. Ken has exchanged letters with Bill Clinton in an effort to add the president's weight to a worldwide ban. And he fought hard for the inclusion of a victims' assistance clause in the Ottawa Treaty of 1997, which the USA was one of the few major countries not to sign. And it was Ken who organised Princess Diana's visit to Bosnia a few weeks before she died. He was the first to greet her when she arrived, and on prosthetic legs, he walked every step of the way with her as she toured the heavily mined suburbs.
Princess Diana's involvement was tremendous, and she cared. She was emotionally taken with the stories of these people's horrors. Many in the West cannot begin to understand the horrors of landmine injuries. I would be dead if I wasn't an American. And the three of us would have died in our own blood if I didn't have that radio to call for help. Most mine victims are not that lucky.
Many of the victims are children, and with their small body mass, they usually kill children on the spot. And I've seen many of these deaths occur this way. And it sickens me, absolutely sickens me.
If this was happening in Great Britain or the United States, this would be a horror of untold proportions. And I know in this country, landmines would have been banned yesterday.
Some real progress has been made. But for this generation, in much of the developing world, the toll of deaths and injuries caused by mines will continue. The evil that men do lives after them. And so it seems to me there rests a certain obligation upon the rest of us.
The Princess Diana Memorial Fund will soon announce which landmine organisations will receive donations. The money will go to survivors. Mohamed Douale walks with a limp, but he's now project director of a major charity in Somalia. Tihomir Ostojic is still waiting for new prosthetic arms and for the computer that will help his education. And since this program began, another 3 people have been killed or injured by landmines.
What if one day someone decides to tear down your home, take away your family, and leave you all on your own? BBC One takes you to the orangutans and their world.
The fires have done tremendous damage.
We dedicate a week of programs to Indonesia's wildlife, its vanishing rainforest, and the hope that lies ahead. Burning East starts Tuesday, September the 1st on BBC One.
Mark Lamarr invites you to spend some Edinburgh Fringe Festival nights with him on BBC Two Wales in 5 minutes. In half an hour's time on BBC One Wales, a reflection on the tragic events that have taken place in Omagh this week. You're watching BBC One Wales. Now the hotelier come landlord to rival Basil has plans to make his fortune. Tim Healy stars in Heartburn Hotel.
with her from school into her womanhood, and that